Welcome to 30 Minutes of Wisdom, Rising in Consciousness and Mindfulness. I'm Veronica Carrera, the creator and producer of the show. 30 Minutes of Wisdom is about rising in consciousness and connecting to our authentic self. And today is Saturday, and it's Saturdays with Dr. Jeff McNairy. And yes.
How's it going? Hola.
Perfect. So, and my beautiful co-host is Lynn Min.
Hey guys.
Great to have you, Lynn. And we're going to talk about what we talk about once a month, every Saturday, mental health in corporate America. And we're going to address several issues here. But so if anyone is here live watching, if you have a specific question, post your comments, and I'll be monitoring them and make sure that I address this with Dr. Jeff. But we're going to start with something that I think is so relevant right now. Is the COVID-19 pandemic and the mental health impact that this crisis is having on people. And I would say, I would dare to say, unprocessed trauma. So, Dr. Jeff, please talk to us. Tell us your perspective on this COVID-19 pandemic and the mental health impact. What is your perspective and what is going on with this world?
Yeah, very good question. So what I've come to understand, at least from my experience with the people I'm dealing with, clinically, is if you're isolated before the pandemic, meaning you don't have a lot of family or social access for whatever reason, then this was really difficult because it kind of like blocked you even more from interaction with others. However, if you come from a family structure or a community structure or you're in your own home where you're not alone, then they can be nicer, but then you're forced to actually deal with the relationships that are in front of you, which is easy to avoid when you're working and leaving the house all the time. So it's been kind of like hard for both groups. I'm more concerned about the people that are extra isolated more than anybody else. And when you're isolated, think about what is a punishment in prison. The most horrific punishment in prison is going into isolation, into the hole, right? Where you go alone for days or weeks or months. And that's where the prisoners say, I don't care what you do to me, just don't put me there, right? So that says a lot about, just what that means mentally for people. Obviously in your own house, you're not in the hole in prison, but there's similarities of being isolated, not having no access to people. And you can kind of spin out if you have already a general level of anxiety or depression. Or my biggest concern during the pandemic, especially in the early stages of it, was if people have opiate addictions, and in particular, because it's hard to get opiates if you cannot leave your house or you cannot find your dealer, or if your doctors are not seeing patients a lot. And people that have an opiate addiction are in very dire straits with this pandemic. And alcohol, now you can still go get it probably, but I remember at the beginning, especially when I'm in Costa Rica, they shut down all the alcohol and all the stores for months and months and months. And that's like really dangerous. It's probably a good thing overall, but if you have an addiction to alcohol, you can die if you don't have alcohol. So there's a lot of like public health sort of concerns and issues. And as usual, the people with issues and mental health issues don't get looked at very much. They're not thinking of those people too often. So it's really, really hard if you have, like I said, depression, anxiety, or addiction during this pandemic.
So much. So I know that like companies and in corporate America is really trying to address it, especially because it really affects how they function, how they work. But I still feel like so much of it is unprocessed and not being talked about. And I think part of the reason is not because the companies are not making space for it, but they don't have the answers. Like it's hitting us in a way where I think what we're really trying to like deal with, like the issue is, so if like a hand is coming and I'm like, oh, and I shirk and it was just for a high five, then I would say, okay, my reaction is inappropriate and I would do something about that. But if a hand is coming and it's really, really like trying to hit me, then my hypervigilance is actually appropriate. And as people who are like, well, let's not be hypervigilant. It doesn't help us function. It doesn't help us connect. It doesn't help us be creative. It doesn't help us produce or be effective at our jobs. But when the threat is so real, I think what we're talking about is like, how do you deal with real-time trauma?
Correct. Yeah. Well, what I tell people often is that you have to have a daily practice. And what's funny is that I've met, like I've recently been working with tons of people, because there's been some travel that's been allowed lately, the last several months here. So people have been coming to the facility that I manage here in Costa Rica. And what's been going on is some of the people say, well, I became an amazing yoga person during this pandemic because that's all I did all day in my house in between work calls or whatever. Or they say, well, I really learned how to meditate during this program, during this pandemic, right? So those are the people that were able to be self-assertive and kind of take it in a positive way. Other people crashed and burned. And I think that was kind of more the common thing. And what I noted, I talked to some Google executives recently, and they were telling me that they were having a really hard time because instead of going into the office and having a 9 to 5, or it's not usually 9 to 5, it's usually longer than that. Let's say 9 to 7 or 8.
Yeah.
What they were, and then coming home and having a somewhat of a normal evening with their family. Now they were working, 15 hours a day or more, and because they're in their office, in their home, and they weren't able to assert those work boundaries. So they were just like working constantly. And those people that I talked to just burned out, almost wanted to quit. So what I help them with is establishing, while at home, healthy boundaries with self to just have like a normal 9 to 5. And luckily, I can report a nice thing about Google is that the administrative people there were very, very receptive to that, and they thought it was healthy and good, and so they liked it. So I think that we often get caught up in our own jobs, especially in tech and other really fast-paced, high-pressure careers that we're expected to just work, and it's the mindset of the people in those careers that like to do that, but if you set up a healthy boundary with yourself and teach that to the people you're working with, your bosses even, what my experience is, they're likely better to respond in a positive way because they're struggling too. Like they're working from home, they see it, so I would recommend just healthy communication with your administrative people.
And Dr. Jeff, then what do you think, like in general, people in corporate America, we have a hard time setting up boundaries, particularly now?
Yeah, well, we're driven by capitalism, we're driven by results, we're driven by shareholders' expectations, and we're driven by community pressure and also profit margins, right? So that means by any means necessary, as my favorite thought leader Malcolm X would say, right? You have to get it done. We have to get it done, right? And that's just kind of the mindset, and that's what grinds out companies and makes companies successful, but often at the expense of other people and the people that support it. So having healthy boundaries is scary because it often means, well, I might get aced out by this person next to me with the same skill set, but they're working harder than me. I remember when I was at UCLA, this is funny, it brings up this. When I was at UCLA, I was studying pre-medical sciences while I was in my public health master's. So I was taking all the undergrad chemistries and physics and stuff. And I was seeing, because I was already in the med center as a public health student in grad school, I was mixed up with the medical students, and I was seeing them go into the biomedical library. Like I would show up at 6 a.m. to study in the biomed library in Westwood. And I'd see the same people. They'd already been there for a couple hours, probably since 3 or 4 in the morning. And then I would go to class, I would do all my studies, and I'd come back around 9 p.m. to keep studying in the biomed library. They were still there. Ooh. Then I would leave and go home around 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. or maybe midnight, and they were still there. So I was like, I just said, you know what I said? Screw medical school. That's what I said. And I eventually got in, and I said, I'm not going because I can't compete with these people. These people live this. They do it all day. There's like no, it's like I have a normal life, sorta. I just can't handle it. So I know that we feel this pressure, especially in corporate America, especially in tech. It's hard. And so it comes down to a choice, right? Do you value your own mental health, or do you value, rising up in your company in a way that maybe is not so accurate? Maybe you're thinking incorrectly about it, and it's good to investigate that to see.
And just a quick follow-up question here. So why do some of us have a better way to set these boundaries and cope with it in a healthier way than others? What is at the root of this?
Well, I remember I had a very nice conversation with Lynn a month ago. And Lynn, and if you don't mind, if I could use your example, I think it's really good, which was in family dynamics, we learn a certain way to operate. And if our family dynamic was, you must perform, you must not complain, you must get the job done, and you must be successful. If that's how we were raised, for example, then it's hard to say no or to have boundaries with bosses or administrative people, because we didn't have those boundaries with our parents. We just did what we were told. And, we were good kids and we were performing and we were trying to do the right thing. But it bites us later because we need to have boundaries. So I think it comes down to practicing doing it. Like I remember, Lynn, right? You told me that you would even look in the mirror and say, practice saying no to your mom about certain things.
Absolutely.
Right? I think that's really good. It takes practice. You have to have a goal. You have to have an awareness, first of all, that you want to have a boundary. You have to be aware that you want one. Then you have to set a goal with that person, and then you have to practice it. If that means looking in the mirror as a step one and saying it out loud, that's a great way to do it. And then using it in moments that are maybe not as threatening with your boss. You're like, do you want to go to lunch today? No, thank you. I'm doing something else. Like, you know what I mean? That's an easier one, right? As opposed to, will you finish this project that's due tomorrow? And saying no, I mean, that's scary, right? So it's practice and training them on your response as well. That's important. That's super important.
And sometimes we attach our self-worth to the results of how hard we work, So and it goes back to that whole concept of how do we feel about ourselves? Where do we place our self-worth? So that's very good, Dr. Jeff.
Yeah. It's bringing me back to so we had this wonderful session last week that didn't go live, but we had wonderful conversations around, tech issues. But we had wonderful conversations around just, how we identify and the roles that we play when we're a child. And I think some of that is just kind of slowing our processing down to realize those are expired. I once was in a family where I was the good girl and I was like the do it all. And my mom would always kind of praise me by saying, she does everything so well. She doesn't need any of my help. She's like the easiest kid ever. And that became my role. I was easy. I never asked for help and I did everything right. And to the point where now in an immigrant setting, when my role in the family of how to belong, how to be accepted, how to be praised, and how to be loved, all centers around me delivering this performance and achievement. And it's hard to slow things down. And I remember not being able to, my counselor would be like, what would it look like to have good boundaries with your mom? And I didn't even have a vision. What do you mean? If my mom's like, hey, do you have for example, something easy? Do you have $1,000 I can borrow? It's easy when I don't have it. No, when I'm 18, no, mom, I don't have that money. But when I became an adult and now she's like, do you have $1,000 I can borrow? What does it look like to say, no, you can't? I do, but you can't have it. What do I say? How do I say it? And then how will it be received? And all that is so scary. What does that mean between me and my mom? What if she thinks I'm selfish? What if I think I'm selfish, for not being able to do that? And where do I, draw that line of I can't keep doing this and have that be okay? It was such it just takes away so many of the primary ways that you've identified who you are. I think that's at the root of it. That's why it's so hard. And then when you get into a workspace where you're making the money, this is bread and butter, you have to. There's a sense of you have to. it's your boss, they pay you, right? So it's really hard to come into that space and kind of assert like, I don't have to do anything that I don't feel is good for me. Those are very opposing energies.
Yeah. And I have to say, just going back to what you just shared, Lynn, the concept of having boundaries and practicing that even in our own personal life, so that we know how to have those boundaries at work, in any other setting, in any type of relationship. I found this interesting statistic that was reported recently by a research firm that says that just within the last year alone, anxiety and depression has gone up from 11% to 41%. And that's only the people that have reported, that have participated in this particular study, right? So there is definitely a spike of mental illness and the challenges that we're facing in general. And I just want to touch upon this unprocessed trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're going just like, go.
Yeah.
And I, at times it feels that we hardly address the fact that there is another Delta variant that is a threat. There is like this imminent threat, invisible threat, and we're working. We have to make, the company successful. Then the isolation, the fear of people that they have of getting close to each other, this constant environment of fear. What is that doing, Dr. Jeff? Let's talk about what we are not processing.
Yeah, well, we're not living in the moment, and living in the moment is very important to do. We all have to have goals. We all have to have we have a path and some things we're working towards, of course, healthy sort of, objectives and goals. But what happens in society is if you're present with yourself and grounded in a certain moment, what happens is you have clarity in that moment. You also process trauma in that moment because you're connected to yourself. So emotions will come, and that's fearful and scary for a lot of people. But to get back on what it means in a corporate setting is that, if what I always say, depression is about feeling bad about things in the past, and anxiety is about worrying about things that haven't happened in the future. And so being present is the goal. Now, if my corporate environment wants me to perform constantly, which of course that's what companies do, I'm never living in the moment. I'm always ahead of myself. And this does not allow for self-reflection, processing of any emotion, and especially not trauma. And so that's why things spike. And not only that, before even the pandemic was happening, of the last, let's say, decade, there's less and less and less social interaction occurring just because of the way, the world is and technology. Even my son, who's 18, he's on his video games. I'm thinking to myself, this is ridiculous. He's on here for several hours. And then my ex-wife tells me that's his social interaction because he's playing with friends, like, they're all buddies from school. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And when I was I was working with Dr. Glenn Masuda, who's one of my professors, who's actually my doctoral project's advisor, amazing psychologist. He did a child intervention course for me year long. And he said, you can't hold back with the technology that's coming for the kids or for ourselves, because that's just the way of the future. You can monitor it, you can have boundaries on it, you can make it healthy, but you can't block it. And I found that was really interesting because my instinct was to just throw it up in the trash, but that's not realistic. So what I mean by this is we're moving towards a society of less and less and less and less social interaction. And I believe as human beings, we need social interaction. So living in the moment and then having as much social interaction, whatever that looks like, whether it's cyber interaction or whatever, but something needs to change. And the isolation is what's causing this depression, these spikes of anxiety and mental illness.
The isolation. But Dr. Jeff, I would dare to challenge this, because living in the moment, some people might say, living in the moment means that there is some threat out there right in this moment, right?
Correct.
And I'm actually trying to forget it. That's why I'm making myself very busy.
Correct. Yeah.
So
correct.
how do we manage that? Because the moment for some people means danger.
Yes. And that the living in the moment means danger for people that have, like we're talking about, unresolved trauma.
Yep.
So if I need to be hypervigilant all the time, that's because I'm afraid. Well, why am I afraid? I have to look at that. Like, am I under attack? Like, am I in a war zone? Am I being abused? Likely no. Now, are there pressures on me to perform? Sure. But what was my history like, even from childhood? If there were moments or not just moments, but maybe eras, chunks of time, years, even like from ages 2 to 4, 2 to 7, 5 to 12, whatever, where there was, it was dangerous to be me. There was abuse or, I grew up in Los Angeles in a part that was rough. So my neighborhood was a bit rough. So it was dangerous for me in my neighborhood back then. And if I hold on to that fear from childhood now, I'm not going to want to be in the moment because I'm afraid there's something going to happen all the time. So I need to resolve that. I need to resolve those emotions of what that meant back then for me. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but people just don't, like we've talked about before, they don't always have access to it.
Yeah.
They don't know how to do it. It's expensive to do it for some, it's challenging.
Yeah. I think that the contra energy comes when like the danger actually is like what I'm about to feel, like what I'm sensing. If danger is really out there and I'm sensing it's danger, and then it makes me like hypervigilance. And that was my first question. Like that itself is the danger. I don't want to be feeling all these like feelings that paralyze me, that flight, or freeze response, that when that gets turned on, I'm actually kind of going, that itself is a danger because that keeps me from functioning.
Yeah.
Right. I don't have time to cry. I don't have time to feel my emotions. And so it's this like weird thing where like, and I find this all the time. And this is what we call resistance, right? People go, I know I need to work on my stuff. So they'll come, but they'll resist it because it's costly. It costs something to be yourself and to be in the moment, and it will cost you something. The awareness of it will disrupt something, because you have to understand that like the defense mechanism that we've used to numb it or to minimize it, it functions as something like, it gave us some kind of value. And now where it's like, we just can't keep doing this anymore. You have to go, okay, my defense mechanism, it's like a toolkit. It's like, it's not bad or good, but it's like, we defaulted to this hammer all the time. Now I'm just like hammering the hell out of this house. And it's like, can we slow down enough to kind of like not get rid of the hammer, but just like put it down once in a while and pick up another tool? Maybe it's a screwdriver we need, or a flashlight. But that moment is so scary because all you know is the hammer, and all you've done worked so well for you until now.
I have a good example of that with somebody I just worked with maybe 3 weeks ago. And this guy was, he's an engineer, he has a doctorate in engineering, and he works for a tech company. He does computer coding, and he's super successful. But he was starting to have psychosomatic blocks, and his body was freezing up, and his hands were locking up, and his body was locking up while he was working. And he just didn't understand it. He thought it was carpal tunnel at first, and then he thought it was just something, whatever, like the way he was sitting. But it wasn't. It was emotional. He was not working on himself at all, and he was just go, 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 go. So yeah, like we can default to our hammer and just do what we always do, but eventually it's going to catch up to us. And so it's better to use the hammer sparingly and to have a mix of things that we do. That's super important.
Yes.
So it's interesting because as we are speaking about this, I'm thinking about how some people around me feel about the pandemic, the Delta variant, the threat. It's like they might tell me, but Veronica, this is real. People are getting sick. People are dying. And there's a threat of more people being affected by it. But what I'm hearing, Dr. Jeff, is that there is something out there. Of course, we have to be mindful. We have to take care of ourselves. But in order to stay sane, and to protect our bodies from what's going on externally, what do we have control of? Is our own mental well-being, our own spiritual well-being. That's what we have control of, and that's what we can protect as we're all navigating this challenging situation.
Yeah,
I agree completely. Yeah, it is challenging because there's a lot of different theories about what's going on with this. Having a public health background, working always with UCLA back in the day with public health issues. And E. Richard Brown was my supervisor, who was advisor to Bill Clinton in the cabinet of, for national health care. I had really good professors training and teaching, amazing. So what I've learned is, hey, we can look at the macro system, but we also have to look at the micro system, meaning the community, the population at large, and then the individual. And you can't neglect one or the other. So there's things that we have to be responsible for in a community, global way. There's things we have to be responsible individually, like we're talking about now with trauma and being present and your own mental health. It's very important to have both of those balanced as best you can.
Yeah. And there's an interesting statistic that I want to acknowledge that for people of color, they have been affected disproportionately by this pandemic. I believe Black adults is 48% that are dealing with anxiety and depression, the Latinos, 41%. So it's interesting, like you said, addressing this at the macro level perspective and at the micro level perspective to see how it's affecting communities and individuals.
But also, can I tie this also into like when you were talking about boundaries, and I just thought how nuanced it is. Like some people are going, I need to protect myself. That's why I'm not looking at this, because I need to go and still work. And if I'm scared, I can't do that. So there's their way of protection is like shut off the senses. Just keep going. Just keep going. I don't want to talk about it. But also how nuanced it is when it comes to boundaries, with this whole vaccine thing. I just read that like New York City is going to require proof of vaccination to just do life, basically.
To do life, yeah.
Yeah, and like I know certain companies have just said, hey, they made people sign this thing that says it's your choice to be vaccinated and to come into work. But really what it is if I don't choose that, I don't have a job.
Correct. Not much of a choice, right?
Yeah, not much of a choice. Let's be real, and now it's like this weird thing where it's like, I don't know why or how it became this nuance, but there's like, it's so polarized and it's not even safe to be like, I'm vaccinated or I'm not vaccinated. It's like, and it's so unsafe. Like to talk about COVID, to talk about vaccination, to talk about even safety and what we're doing to keep ourselves safe. A part of it is just like, so this is overwhelming. And so what do? We just shut more stuff down because we just got to go because the bills are still coming,
Correct.
And that's
Correct.
what it is. I just wanted to like create some space to be like, wow, this really sucks. That's the problem. And can we have like the first amount of courage is to slow this down and to look at how impossible and how much of a work it is, just create the space to say, this feels unsafe for me.
Yeah. And also, being divided is the ultimate tactic to control the world, right? So we're seeing it on so many platforms, right?
Yes.
The
many
vaccine
levels
versus not, race relations,
yes.
Political party relations, regional parts of the world relations. I mean, you can go on and on and on and on. And that's a great tactic, divide and conquer, right? That's just, that's from, the art of war. I mean, that's just like
art of war.
Stuff. So I'm all for unifying and always bridging gaps of misunderstanding. That's like my whole world is what I love, right? And like Veronica said, with the people of color that are suffering more, that's how it always tends to be, right? Because the people of color are more often than not neglected and not educated, meaning that the people do not give them the same educational information access, is what I mean by that. And they do not have, they're just they're pushed aside, and it's been happening forever. And because of that, health problems surge, mental health issues surge. There's access problems, there's economic issues, and all that affects everybody. And one thing I really love, and I know you guys like this too, about coming down here to Costa Rica and being at Rhythmia, is there's such a diverse group of clients who come here from all over the world. It's a beautiful thing to see. And you see that it's possible, because when we get caught, like I'm from Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
LA is pretty diverse, right?
Right.
And,
That's right.
However, there are divisions there, there's a bit of historical divisions. And so even though I come from a very diverse place, I still feel it when I'm in LA. But here in Costa Rica, at this place, it's such a cool vibe, like to see like, wow, I can totally relate to somebody from Afghanistan, you know what I mean? Or Nigeria or wherever, Japan, because I'm hanging out with them and we're eating at the same table. We're going to the same classes. We're talking about the same cool stuff. It's such a breath of fresh air to actually connect with people that are totally different than you. And they see that everybody just wants the same thing. They want peace, they want happiness, and they want success in ways that are good for them. And that's it. That's what they want.
Love.
That's right.
Exactly. And thank you for mentioning what happens at Rhythmia in Costa Rica, because it is for me an example of heaven on earth. And that's what I look at. And even look at us now. I mean, I'm Latin, then you have someone from Korea, then you, American. I mean, this is exactly how it needs to be. And you talked about this unification. During this time, how do you find your tribe so you can manage this? How do you connect with yourself? And I think that should be the beginning, right? Connect yourself to your higher self, to the universe, whatever you want to call it, God, and find a community to help you navigate something very challenging and unprecedented. So leave us with some final words. I mean, Lynn and Dr. Jeff.
I guess, I'm going to go because, I'm not outdoing Dr. Jeff.
No, I can go. No, trust me, you always do outdo me.
I'm like, dang, he said it so well. I have nothing else to say.
You're too funny. You're too funny. I need time to think. That's why I want you to go first.
No, I need to go first because you there's just, oh man. But I love, again, this is just going to be a version of what you've said, Dr. Jeff, but this unification, I mean, and for me as a pastor and emerging that with my psychotherapy background, my sacred text says when people are one, when everyone is one, they will know that I am God, right? Whoa. It just like spiritually, it makes sense to me. Like, and you're right, Veronica, when as we are doing the spiritual journey and the mental health journey, it is of one. And I think it's just like, where is my little like piece of heaven on earth? And that's really our journey, right? Yeah. And so I would say the thing, and also unity, the where do we find the connection, and the sense of unity and the humanity that we all share, right? That we all want to be safe. We all want to be, nobody ever is born and be like, I'm going to one day kill people and like, just like hate people. Like no one says that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that is the opposite of what we began with isolation. Right. And so our work, it gave me so much hope because I can now pinpoint, okay, so the work is, where do I find moments and ways to connect and bring heaven on earth towards unifying people, whether it's two or like a multiple group. I just feel, or like the voices within myself, right? How do I unify? How do I connect? And so those two things are, I think, what I take and the intention I leave for the people that are listening. Go towards that. What does it mean to unify you and connect you and to others too?
Beautiful, awesome. Lynn. Beautiful, beautiful. So now let's finish with the God of psychology.
Too funny. Well, along those same lines is what Lynn was saying, is that if you have true empathy for people, which means you can feel their emotional sort of vibe or energy or process, the last thing you want is that person to feel upset, hurt, sad, or disenfranchised. Because you feel it yourself. I can, from in LA, I could go look at a homeless man and just have sympathy and be like, yeah, that sucks. It probably is hard to be him. Or I can feel how he's feeling and have empathy. And I can feel his despair and I might cry and it will definitely ruin my day. Now, I don't want him to feel like that because I don't want to feel like that either. And that's a true connection. So that's the key to healing the world, is having empathy. Now we don't understand the intellectual side of other people at all, likely, especially if we were raised a certain way. It's hard to understand people on the other side of the world, how they think, at least intellectually, but emotionally, we can all understand each other. And that's the key to it. So if I can feel what others feel, the last thing I want is for them to be hurt. And that's how we all change, right? That's how the world changes.
What a wonderful way to finish. It's empathy and compassion is the way to heal the world. And ultimately ourselves, because we're all part of the oneness.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff.
Thank you.
Yes.
Another successful Saturday session with Dr. Jeff and mental health. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, everyone. We look forward to reading your posts and questions. I know that some of you are going to watch this after we go live, and we'll make sure, Lynn and I and Dr. Jeff, to answer your questions and also get in touch with Dr. Jeff. Thank you. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Pura vida. Ciao.
Pura vida.